Hi, Denise Dryden here. And I'm not in Whitefish. I'm in Spokane, Washington, watching it just dump snow outside. So I've been traveling the last week down through California, now back up through Oregon, and sitting in a little hotel, ready to go out for breakfast when I'm done with this. But let's talk about boundaries. Boundaries. It's one of those things. Everybody has boundaries. Everybody knows we need boundaries. But I want to talk about what happens when we meet people who want to push on those, peek on them, try to see what else we need to do. So I think it's going to be really interesting. So let's just go for a ride and see what happens here. So a boundary is defined as a parameter that we set, and most of us set those so that we feel safe and comfortable. And it's created to set limits, to define space, and to define activity. So, we sort of put these in on place so that we know exactly what makes us feel comfortable. So I think when we set a boundary, the most important thing is we set a boundary that makes us feel comfortable and safe, that gives us some room to move around in. And sometimes those boundaries are really close, and sometimes they're miles ahead of us, or exaggeration. They're further out in front of us because we don't feel safe, and we have to have really strict guidelines as to how we keep people away, or how we keep them right where we feel best. I guess that's the best way to describe it. I don't know. I'm a little. Boundaries are difficult to describe because to me, what they do is they talk about what we know about ourselves. When we know that we have a firm boundary with ourselves, when we know that that's who we are, that's what we love, that's what we need, then we know what that boundary is. When we are projecting that out of fear or out of doubt or distrust, I think there's a little detectors. And I always call them boundary explorers. There are people in our lives that can tell when these boundaries are real for us and when they're not. And children are the best. They're the best because we get all firmed up and we state our boundary like, no, this is not possible. I'm not comfortable with that. Or you've pushed too far. And if that boundary is inauthentic, then our little boundary explorers go up around the edges and they start lifting up the bottom and coming in at the side, and they start exploring and they start pushing on all of those areas where maybe they're not fortified, maybe they're not real, maybe they don't really work for us. But the bottom line is that these boundary explorers are there to push and test on our boundaries. And so the thing is that, what are they testing? Why are they there? Why do we have people in our lives, whether it's partners, co-workers, children, even strangers, who detect something in us and they get up and they push on our boundaries? And so what I came up with is that, they push to see if you have clarity. Are you really in alignment with that limit that you set? To see the real you, the authentic you. They really want to see you when you glow, you when you're lined up, you when you're in your power. And they can tell when that boundary is real. Like as a parent, when I could say to my kids, yeah, that's great, but no, I'm not going to do that. And they could tell that I was completely real and completely in alignment with myself. They were like, yep. No way, you can't get through mom on that one. And so then they would go around and go to dad, or they would find other ways to move around, because children, especially teens, are exploring what are boundaries, what are they there for, and what happens if they're more constricted than what I'm comfortable with, and then I want to push on them. So they want to see our authentic self. And so what I'm going to say is that when we are our most authentic and when we set our boundaries from that, then I believe that we alleviate the boundary pushing. And then sometimes these little boundary explorers, they're there to wake us up. They're there to go, I wonder why you keep things this far away. And they kind of ask you questions that you go, well, maybe it's time to reevaluate what I do and why I set these parameters around myself. So to give you a specific idea is that they're testing these, and then they're going to play with them. And sometimes testing boundaries isn't negative. It's like, hey, this is your comfort zone. Let's stretch it a little bit over here. Let's push it out over here. Let's watch you expand in this. And so they give us opportunities to grow and to take our boundaries, which is sort of like I like to see it as an invisible seal around me, and stretch it and expand it and push it. And so, there's that playful, curious side, and then there's that frustrated, even mean side when kids are in there and they're like, no, I'm going to break you down. And so you have to hold that boundary really, really firm. And so what I wanted to talk about is that these boundaries are holes, they're gaps, they're distances that everyone in our world is going to test to see if they're real. And if we know ourselves and we know our boundaries very clearly, then it usually isn't a problem. We don't get pushed all the time. When you notice that you have a lot of boundary pushers or boundary explorers in your life, maybe that's time to sort of go inward and find out, what am I putting out there that's different than who I am? Because I think that these little detectives, these little people in our lives who are there to sort of push us around on our edges, are there for a reason, as I said, and they're inviting us to find this superpower we have within ourselves. Because when we are authentic, when we know that our boundaries and our life are in alignment, the pesky peepers, the ones that want to get in there and push and explore, they seem to go away. And we shift into this sort of, we shift from defending ourselves into expanding. And that expansion is like a superpower. It's like, I'm here, I know what I want to do, I know what works for me, and I can come from a place in my relationships of compassion and understanding when I watch someone kind of come up and get curious. So when we are, it's sort of like when this boundary is established and we're clear about ourselves, then we can say, we take it out of the black and white. We take it out of the absolutes and we put it into the co-creation side, which is when we have a teenager that we may have very strict boundaries about what happens with money, what happens with time, what happens with curfews, what happens with vehicles, what happens with all of these things. And our boundaries are very strict about that. But when something happens that surprises us, they break a rule, they make a mistake, they come in and they push too hard, and we are using our superpower boundaries, like, I'm holding on, I'm right here, then they come up and they kind of, am I going to be okay? And then we know we can come from a place of absolute compassion. Oh, so you just pushed really hard on this. I'm going to react with compassion, and I'm going to use this as a time for lessons. I'm going to use this as a time to explain why we do things, what works, what doesn't work. I'm going to give you an example. I had a family I was working with, and this kiddo was someone who was pushing on the boundaries, pushing on the boundaries, pushing on the boundaries. And what we finally realized was that if he's pushing that hard, what is it that he doesn't understand? What is it that we can do as parents to be clearer? What is it that we can do to define ourselves in a softer way? And then when that boundary is pushed, when that kiddo gets up and does something that is just maybe even egregious, they took some money, they took the car without permission, they did something, and instead of coming in with this huge slap down, we go in and we go, what was going on and what can we do about that? And then we understand that this superpower boundary of ours isn't about, you can come in and hurt me, you can come in and wobble me as a parent. It's that I'm going to expand and I'm going to meet you in that place where you're up against my limits. And we're going to deal with it in a softer, compassionate, less black and white way. So when I'm talking about boundary peakers, it's that we establish limits within ourselves for reasons. And I'm encouraging you to understand what those reasons are, to know yourself really well, to know what works for you, to know why that boundary needs to be there, and to above all believe that that boundary is going to be tested and it's going to be pushed on by the people we know and love. And that isn't a negative thing. It's helping us define ourselves. It's helping us bring it all together. And then when someone gets up next to that limit, we can either push it out further out of fear, or we can hold it like a superpower and say, so why are you up here so close, and what is it that you really want to know, and how are we going to move forward from here? So our boundary peaking, our boundary pushing, our boundary explorers are there for a reason. So I'm here to invite you to explore what you set as boundaries. Do you even set them at all? And when you set them, how clear are you about how they represent you? So this is the kind of stuff I do. We talk about boundaries. We talk about why they're there. We talk about being authentic. And I do this in my coaching. So feel free to check me out on DeniseDrydenCoaching.com. And if you have any questions about boundaries, drop me a line and we can explore it. All right, so have a wonderful Sunday. From here, I've just got a window right over here, and it's just snowing all over the place, and I've got to go up over a couple of passes. So it's going to be a treacherous day. So be safe out there. Stay warm. Have a wonderful holiday, and I will see you on the 1st of January. I'm taking a hiatus next week for the holidays because my daughters are going to be in town. So enjoy and have a great holiday. Bye.